Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's always so exciting to see the attendees coming in to this virtual webinar room of ours. Welcome, welcome. We'll just give it probably another minute or so as our attendees are trickling in. So wonderful to see some friendly names here. Hi, George. Hi, Aaron. Wonderful. This is very exciting. And thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Find Monday, the last Monday of April. All right, we'll just give it another minute today. Kelly, was that a 2-minute or a peace sign?
Well, yeah, give them 2 minutes and a piece.
I love it. How's everyone doing today? We'll do a virtual nod, or you can also use the chat button here. I love the fact that our collaborative network has such a great group of members, and it's also representing the population throughout the state of California that allows us to gain insight. That's truly how we have also formed our AAPI working group, our affinity group here. So I'm really pleased and happy to see everyone on this webinar. Hi, Sienna. I'm excited that you're here. All right, so it is 12:02, and I want to be respectful for everyone that have already joined us today. It's very exciting to be here. So let me just go ahead and just jump right in. First of all, I wanted to bid good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I am going to go ahead and share my screen right here, and then we'll go through some of the details here. Can everyone see my screen here? 1 second. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, wonderful, great. All right, so welcome to our webinar, Below the Surface, a deep dive into the Asian American Pacific Islander community's connection with the coast and building inclusive marine protected areas, as presented by the Marine Protected Area Collaborative Network. My name is Michelle Tron. I am proud to serve as the AAPI coordinator on behalf of the MPA Collaborative Network. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time for us today. So today, we will explore that rich diversity of the AAPI community and also their profound connection to marine and coastal environment. Now, through the next hour, we will aim to shed light on the myths, highlight the legacies, and discuss forward-thinking approaches to inclusivity of the MPAs in coastal California. So before we get started, I wanted to share a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we do have a Q&A session that's built into our webinar time today. It's going to take around 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of today's webinar. So if you do have questions along the way, I highly encourage that you use the Q&A button on your Zoom navigation bar. If you are unfamiliar with using Zoom, please take a moment, look at your screen, and find the navigation strip, and you'll see the Q&A button here that you can utilize to type in a question, and I will be keeping track of your question and making sure that we get those answered before we wrap up today's webinar. Now, and additionally, all of the slides that you see here, along with the notes and then also the link for each of the slides, will be shared with you together with the webinar. So in case you haven't noticed, the webinar will be recorded. So the recording along with the presentation and also all of the source links will be shared with you after the webinar today. So in the case that you see on some of the slides that there are more detailed notes on here, don't bother taking notes during the webinar, but just simply know that you'll have the resource afterwards. And last but not least, if you are not already following us, we are active on social media. So make sure that you follow Marine Protected Area Collaborative Network on Instagram. Our handle is MPA Collaborative Network, and that is the platform that we will be sharing upcoming campaigns, upcoming initiatives with regards to the AAPI Affinity Group and then also AAPI community here. Thank you very much, Parth. All right, so just to kick off our webinar today, first we want to share a quote from the first Asian woman that have ever won Best Actress for the Oscar, Michelle Yeoh. Now, she had once said, when you face up to bad things in the past, the most important thing is not to allow them to happen today or in the future. And as storytellers, we must play our part in that. This quote is of significance because of the sentiment that it conveys. And I think to a great a point of extent, it also aligns with the message that we're really focused on here in today's webinar, is that we're looking forward to telling the story of how organization can engage with the AAPI community and further bridge that meaningful connection with the AAPI population, rather than dwelling on what has not worked in the past. So this is really kind of the linchpin as we continue and then engage with our panelists and sharing about their experience as part of the critical members of the AAPI community here. So what makes our webinar today particularly special is the diverse panelists that we have on today. And they're not just diverse based on their cultural and their ethnic background, but more importantly is their profession, is where they have cultivated years of their lives in the professional fields that they're in, which truly represents a unique perspective in the ways that organization can connect with the AAPI community. So today, so right here, I just want to introduce our panelists and ask them to take a minute or two to introduce themselves. So I'll start from the slide from left to right. So starting with An. An, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also what is your passion in the community?
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for kicking us off, Michelle. Hi, everybody. My name is Andeep. I am a 30 by 30 program manager with the Ocean Protection Council. And if you're not familiar, we're a cabinet level state body that works jointly with state and federal agencies, NGOs, tribes, and the public to ensure that California maintains healthy, resilient, and productive oceans and coastal ecosystems. Prior to my role here at OPC, I was a science policy fellow at the California Natural Resources Agency, where I worked on the land side of 30 by 30, which is our state goal to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And now that I've switched to the coastal side, I make the joke that I switched from sweet to salty. Prior to that, I was a UC Merced graduate student. I'm an immigrant from Vietnam, and yeah, just so happy to be here and to share my journey with you all.
We're so happy to have you. Thank you so much, An. Next, we have Parth. Hey, Parth, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Parth. I am a senior scientist at ERM, which stands for Environmental Resources Management. I'm a biologist, a project biologist for them, but my background is in ecology. I did my undergrad in ecology, and I worked in an ecological physiology lab. Then I did my master's in marine ecology and marine biology. So most of my work is all marine based. I did my thesis actually on human impacts in MPAs versus non-MPAs in Newport and Orange County as a whole. So that was kind of my delving into anthropogenic impact and human impact on coastal zones, which now getting to merge that with where I am now. I'm also the AAPI lead in my company, which I've been at for 6 years. And so over there, I kind of lead a focus on Asian and Pacific Islander background in a mainly Caucasian dominated environment and career field. And so I'm kind of bringing those two together, and this call today brings those two facets as one. So thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me over here.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Parth. Next up, we have Dr. Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Caitlin Quote. I'm a clinical psychologist and group practice owner and a long-term vegan. So being an immigrant myself and a clinical psychologist, it actually allowed me to have the privilege to experience it firsthand and have a bit deeper understanding of the cultural identity to a person. And being a vegan actually educated me and really opened my eyes about how sustainability issues and the conservation effort have an impact on the environment as well as human being. So it's really meaningful and honor for me to be here to have a conversation. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. We're excited to have you, Dr. Caitlin. And last but not least, we have Helen. Hi, Helen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Helen. I'm currently a biologist working in both consulting and state agency. In my daily job, I focus more on the data analysis side of it. I just graduated from my master's degree at UCI last year, and my master's study was focused on marine mammal entanglements and its related policies. That's why I'm like in this group. And I moved to California from Taiwan about 5 years ago to pursue for my career and study. Prior to that, I also have traveled and worked in a few different countries in Europe and Latin America. And that's like during my journey, I learned that although there are a lot of differences among cultural values, they can also share a lot of similarities sometimes. And I really enjoy the process of like continuing the communications and learning processes in a multicultural environment. But I'm also an enthusiastic diver and enjoys oceans very much. And thank you for having me.
That's incredible, Helen. I have to say, even just hearing about the background of our panelists today, not only I am even more excited about today's webinar, I'm also thinking our ocean conservation, the cause for environmental protection is in really good hands. I'm feeling really confident right now with everyone devoting into the cause. So with that being said, let's just jump right in. So first, we wanted to start with an overview of the AAPI community in the state of California. For a couple of key statistics around the AAPI community in the state actually comprises of over 6 million people, and that makes up about 15.5% of the state's total population. It's pretty significant. This community is not only diverse, but it is the fastest growing demographic in the state that has amounted for a quarter of the total growth in the last decade or so. But what is more significant is that that growth trajectory continues to climb higher and higher, which means representation of the AAPI community in the state of California is at a critical point, more important than ever. Now, additionally, contrary to the stereotype that Asian Americans are the perpetual foreigner, 95% of the AAPI community in the country actually speak English, while 81% of them speaks English fluently. And this is a really notable statistic because a lot of time we see that oftentimes resources are being spent into translation or transcreation. The language part of that are being devoted by communities and also by organization is of great value, except also, we just wanted to share that a majority of the AAPI community are English speakers. And in fact, involvement in having that integration into the community is key and even more essential. Now, with these data points as our backdrop, let's get into the vibrant mosaic of the AAPI culture, as each ethnicity brings unique perspective and value to environmental conservation. Our first key point is around the what. First of all, we wanted to share with you on who are the AAPI members. You know, we wanted to explain Asian American Pacific Islander community. That's a really big part of the world here. The AAPI community encompasses a vast array of culture and ethnicity, from the Eastern Asian to the Pacific Islanders. So it is really crucial to understand the diversity within the AAPI community in order to appreciate the varied interaction that these groups have with coastal environment and then also their conservation effort. So the first question I would actually want to pose is to Dr. Caitlin. So we understand that the AAPI community encompasses a wide range of cultural and cultures and languages. Now, could you share a little bit of insight on some of the more lesser known groups within the AAPI population, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So please allow me to spend a little bit of time to explain the AAPI because it's really important to me. So AAPI, we know, is the Asian American and Pacific Islander. It's actually an umbrella. It's an umbrella term that refers to a vast, diverse group of people from a collection of countries in the Asia Pacific regions. So we can see from the map, we have East Asia, usually that refers to Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, Japanese. And Southeast Asia are Cambodian, Filipinos, and Malaysians. South Asia is Indians, Nepalis, and Pakistan. And West Asia is typically referred to the Middle Eastern. And we also have a Central Asia, are Armenians and Mongolians, versus PI, Pacific Islander, usually refer to the Fijians and Guams, Hawaii, and Samoa. The reason I want to talk about this is not long ago, I had a conversation with a group of people. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an immigrant. I'm from Taiwan, and I was having a conversation with my friend. So someone asked, if what would you fill up on the survey as your ethnicity group? And there are a few people, they actually said that, well, we're Pacific Islander. It's not surprising in a way because Taiwan is a small island in the Pacific Ocean. So a lot of people just assume that we're Pacific Islander, but actually we're not. We're considered East Asian. So it just allowed me to understand that a lot of people probably don't really fully understand the Asian Americans and the Pacific Islander and the differences between these two rich, diverse group. So the differences between Asian American and Pacific Islander, I think that Asian Americans, we have a rich capacities of language, religions, and customs, and the societal norm. Versus the Pacific Islander, they have really different set of culture, primarily from Polynesians and Micronesians. So they have represent the beautiful of art of tattoos or hula dance, and their sense of family and community are the distinctive aspects of the Pacific Islander culture. Versus Asian Americans, we usually have different challenges among Pacific Islander. For us, we tend to experience the racial discriminations or the modern minority myth. And Pacific Islander, they usually generally underrepresented, and they are frequently lack of visibilities or understanding. So I hope that by recognizing those differences, we can have better appreciate the richness and the complexity of each group, and in the hope that we can foster a more inclusive environment where everyone can feel that they are being seen and being valued.
That's incredible, Dr. Caitlin. I actually, based on what you described, I actually recall when I was 10 years old and I was helping my parents fill out the census survey, that was exactly what I checked off as a Pacific Islander group. But as a Taiwanese Chinese descent, you're saying, of course, now I'm checking off the East Asian category. So that's really, really eye-opening, especially including a personal experience of mine. Now, I wanted to tap into your psychology expertise. So from a psychological perspective, how important would you say is the preservation of cultural identity? Because you just shared with us that it's very important to understand the term AAPI actually represents this vast group of communities in the world, but the Pacific Islanders from the East Asian to the Central Asians, we look very, very differently. So how important do you think is the preservation of that cultural identity in order to achieve the well-being within the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the cultural identity is really important to sense of well-being and the sense of belonging. So we can look into the different aspects, right? So the cultural identity usually contributed to a sense of belonging. So it's a fundamental human needs. Most immigrants, as Michelle, you mentioned earlier, a lot Asian American Pacific Islander is a fast-growing populations. A majority of this populations in America, they are born in the different countries and migrant to this country. So they speak different language. So for them, it's really important to understand and have a stronger sense of cultural identity because they experience a acculturation process to identify themselves in the two different cultures. Usually that will bring up a lot of stress, identity confusions, and social isolation. So when we can have a better sense of cultural identity, we can have a better sense of belonging. And research has shown that actually when you have a positive cultural identity, that usually links to a higher self-esteem. So just to share some of my work with my clients, majority are Asian American. Not long ago, like the Asian foods were not really popular 10 years, 20 years ago. So a lot of my clients, they actually are the first generations or they were born and raised here, but then they feel ashamed to bring their food to school because their food has smell, a strong smell. So from feeling ashamed to understand what your culture means, what the food means to your culture, and understand that how much their parents or their ancestor tried to the effort, like work really hard to bring them to this country, to provide them to have access to a better educational systems or the lifestyle. They learn to bring a sense of appreciation and a sense of pride. So I think that bring up a lot of resilience, and that would help us to feel that, I have a sense of strong root. On top of that, I think most of the Asian American and Pacific Islander are more of a collective culture. So when we have a strong cultural identity, that usually will help us to feel that the resilience. When I face the life challenges, I know that I have my families and a group of community people that they got my back. That itself is a really strong sense of inner strength for people to face any obstacles in life.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Caitlin. I think there's a lot of great nuggets that I picked up just from what Dr. Caitlin had said about AAPI have been seen by the mainstream media as this group of people, and that represents East Asians, Central Asians, just this big gigantic group of Asians. But within the AAPI community, there are so many distinct cultures, languages, from the way we all look, we speak, we interact. And I think that really brings up into this slide right here. And this is such a powerful quote, because during our working sessions of our AAPI affinity group here at the Collaborative Network, all of our members saw and learned about this quote that was published by Pew Research Center study on Asian American, and it all resonated so much with each of the members here. And I just want to take a moment and read out this quote on: "No single experience defines what it means to be Asian in the United States." And this really echoes back to what Dr. Caitlin had mentioned about the cultural identity. Asian American lived experiences are in part shaped by where they're from, how connected they are to their family's ethnic origin, and how others, both Asian and non-Asian, see and engage with them in their daily lives. Because just in this quote alone, it unpacks the diversity of AAPI community. It unpacks the origin of AAPI members. And it also unpacks just that forward continuing cultural, and then also the way that AAPI members are carrying out their lives through immersion of Western and American influences here. So I want to take a moment, and based on this quote, I wanted to pose a question to Parth, because I know you and I have talked a lot, privately about your experience being a member of the APAC community. But based on this quote, how do you think it has led you through this path, or also some of the experience that resonated with your work?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to kind of go from like small to big on this. So I'm an Indian American. I'm from the South Asian subcontinent of India. Within India is kind of a microcosm of its own that has a ton of different cultures and languages and everything, really. You go from the north to the south, to east to the west, it's very different everywhere you go. So that in and of itself shows that there's a ton of different experiences that people experience within the Indian nationality. I myself am two different types of Indian actually within the country. Now that's a small version. Then you go bigger and you think of Asian and Pacific Islander as a whole. And oftentimes when people think of AAPI, they may think of more Eastern Asian, or not primarily Eastern Asian is what people may think of, not as much thinking of South Asians and not as much thinking of Pacific Islanders. So that's another viewpoint of like, oh, there's more people, there's more backgrounds, there's more experiences within that grouping as well. And then you take that on a global scale and you put that into like a science background and into marine protected areas and coastal work and everything. We all come from so many varying different backgrounds and so many different personalities and personas. Not everything is equal. Not everything is equitable. Our experiences may not be the same. The supports we may get from our communities, our families, our education may not be as positive in one grouping's background versus another. And so that's kind of the key factor that I like to hone in on when I talk about AAPI within even my company, in that hey, we're all here, we're all doing similar ecological work, we're all doing work that may be surrounding sciences as a whole, but that doesn't mean that we all came on the same path. It doesn't mean that we all had the easiest path or the hardest path. It varies. And so that's one thing that, like, when you bring up, what's your background or where do you come from, that often people get kind of nervous to ask that, but I feel like that's a very fair question because it kind of, I don't know, elucidates a bit of, what brought you here? Because there's so many different milestones that you came across that I didn't, and vice versa. So this whole quote kind of brings that together within our careers, within our AAPI view, within my viewpoint of being an Indian. It kind of applies in all of those factors. So that's kind of how I see this quote apply to it all, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Parth. That was an excellent, excellent explanation from your perspective. Now, now you've mentioned that you're Vietnamese. You have a background being very immersed in the Vietnamese culture, and with everything that you have experienced in your life, tell me, how do you go about reflecting upon this quote here in your own way?
Yeah, totally. Just like Michelle said, I'm Vietnamese. I was born in Saigon and raised in Cang Tho, where you might know the famous floating markets of Vietnam. But ethnically and culturally, I'm also half Chinese. So my paternal grandparents came from Guangzhou, China, before settling in Sóc Trăng, Vietnam, which is kind of like a very large expat, like Chinese community there. And so growing up, it was kind of like a blending of these cultures and navigating these two kind of like expectations or traditions, so to say. And then when I immigrated to the United States as a child, that kind of like blending of cultures persisted. So I always see myself like living one foot in both worlds, so to say. And it's allowed me to kind of like navigate different systems of knowledge, different systems of like cultures and values. And funny enough, it informs the work that I do today because I do our community engagement and tribal affairs, which requires you to look at things from different perspectives and different lenses, right? And when I think about kind of like this big grand world of conservation that we're in, you know, we often frame it as competing interests, like what do the fishermen want versus the conservationalists? What do the recreationalists want versus the naturalists? But in reality, just like Parth said, we all share this value, this like, uniting desire, which is that we want to steward our natural resources. We want to see the health of our communities and our oceans, like, all thrive. So how do you find that unifying thread? And I joke about this, but like, throughout my entire childhood, starting when I was like 10 and could have a grasp of English, I was translating like documents for my parents. So a very salient memory of mine is like, being walked into the bank and being like, asked, what is escrow? And you being 10 years old and being like, I think it means this. But I share this I share this story because I think it's a very common, like, experience that a lot of like children of immigrants and immigrants have as they navigate both literally translating and sometimes subconsciously translating one's own experiences. And then, just having that empathy of different perspectives and where different people are coming from. So that way now in my day-to-day role, I echo you, Parth. Yeah. One wrong translation, maybe we don't get this loan. But I digress. But yeah, in like the day-to-day work that we do, where we do have to kind of like navigate these different value systems, that ability to kind of like see where other people are coming from and understand that their fear, anxieties, and concerns are really useful. And I would say that, like, growing up as an immigrant and then growing up just navigating these two different cultures have really helped me in this current line of work by being able to find those kind of like common threads between people.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, An. That was so incredible. As well as such an intimate experience that I think a lot of time resonates with a lot of the children or the teenagers within the AAPI community. I feel that just, a few minutes into our webinar, we're already unpacking so much here, and specifically within the last couple of slides around the distinction of AAPI. And An mentioned something about this leading into the work that she does, because I also understand, and I see this every day within government organizations or nonprofit organizations, when they're thinking about engaging with AAPI community, it's great. We'll put models who are Asian on the on our flyers. But at the same time, like Parth said, the Eastern Asian versus the South Asians are very distinctly different, and the importance of recognizing the specific cultural identity within the AAPI group is essential if any organization were to build more meaningful engagement and connection through the work that they're doing, just like An had mentioned about recognizing the uniqueness and then also honoring their legacy. So I just wanted to double click on that just a tiny bit more. But first, I wanted to share some key information or key statistics with everyone here. Oftentimes, there is a very surprising fact around the AAPI community is going back to what we have been sharing about how distinct the subgroups are. And this became very eye-opening for me as well when we at the AAPI affinity groups of the Collaborative Network were doing the research for today's webinar, is that according to the 2020 US Census, there are actually 21 ethnic subgroups that are categorized within this AAPI community that we're in. And these 21 subgroups are amount for about 97.4% of the total AAPI community population in California alone. I can't necessarily say I've seen any like this statistic apply onto other ethnic groups on how diverse, specific ethnic groups are. But particularly, my next question is for Helen, because Helen, I know you pose such an interesting background. As you mentioned, you're from Taiwan, but also at the same time, I'm sure in your daily encounter, people associate you as Chinese American. So tell us a little bit more about your background and also your experience, and how do you go about shaping your cultural identity?
Yeah. So again, like I was actually born in the States and then moved back to Taiwan with my family at infancy. And then I grew up in Taiwan and speak Mandarin as my native tongue. And prior to my move to the California, I never visited the States. So despite of being a citizen culturally, I actually identify myself more with first generation immigrants and Taiwanese. Although like in childhood, a lot of people will call me like American, and I just like don't self-identify myself as American at all because I never lived here before. And so up to this day, I'm still learning about the cultures and the languages every day, and with the diverse culture that we have in California. And so most of my Taiwanese friends around the same age living in the States also come to the States for the same reason, to develop the study and career. And our generation actually also share a very strong belief and identity as Taiwanese. And as a result, we get asked a lot of like, what's the difference between Taiwan and China, which is a very controversial issue that I know most of Taiwanese wouldn't feel comfortable speaking in public about it. And I just want to bring up just because like that's something like if you are interested in asking, like we're always like happy to share. But it also depends on like how public this thing is. And then even among the Taiwanese, we also share like different set of impressions of Taiwan and taste of the food compared to the first generation Taiwanese from different period of time even. So this like really made me learn that there are like so many different layers of identity even among Taiwanese. And then, what I think that like I am Taiwanese, I know not all the Taiwanese will agree with that either. So just many different layers of identity into this.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that experience with me. So Dr. Kaylin, I have another question for you, because as we're understanding the uniqueness within the member of AAPI community, a lot of our attendee on today's webinar are representing nonprofit organizations or government agencies. So if they're trying to further understand the engagement or recognizing the uniqueness of AAPI community, what do you think are some of the examples that would benefit organizations by recognizing the distinctive ethnic subgroups in the work that they do?
Sure. Well, like I shared earlier, I'm a group practice owner, and our group is actually a multicultural emphasis. We strive to really help people of color, marginalized population to grow and thrive. So to me, to honor and emphasize that everyone's difference and their culture and uniqueness is really important. So to me, when we are like, for example, like now is April, right? It's such a beautiful time of the year. We have Ramadan, and we also have Passover. We also have a New Year of Thailand's, celebrated by Thailand's and Cambodia's and Laos. So it's really, as an organizations or leaders, it's really important to recognize that those holidays that they celebrate and honor. And if we are going to host any event, for example, just use myself as example. When we're going to host a networking event or luncheon, during this time of Ramadan, I will absolutely want to include those people, letting them know that I know that you practice and honor the Ramadans. If you don't feel comfortable coming in, we understand that. By saying this is that it's a message showing that how much I respect your culture. And that help us to develop and build a sense of meanings, and meaningful connections between us, and that will absolutely enhance the engagement between the community. And one of the things that, Michelle, you shared earlier, and I think it's really important to understand about the immigrants, like what Helen shared earlier, being an immigrant, and really a lot of time we encounter this sense of identity confusions, and that's what we see all the time. And really understand that people as a human being, we strive to have the connection because we're a social creature. So a lot of immigrants, they experience coming to this country, usually the way to fit in is something really important because it's a way of survival. So usually what we will see is that you can see this immigrants, they come to located somewhere that they can find a neighborhood where they can find where they can eat the food, or they can find people who can speak their language. And or the next part is that probably they can find the practice, the church or temples where they practice a similar religions. And this behavior is so important because that can help us to understand how strong the community and the sense of cultural identity it is to a person's well-being. And that can help us understand that one critique that immigrants frequently face is that we wanted to be so close to our community or our own culture. It's not because we don't want to expose to or learn about Western culture. It is because we need to connect with our own culture. And that brings a sense of belonging. So within the organization, what we want to do is really just honor and understand these needs and how we can really fulfill this need, make them feel that they're being seen, they're being valued, and we honor their unique and their culture.
Excellent. I really very much appreciate that. And I think what Dr. Caitlin had mentioned about the need of recognizing the diversity as it brings, even is in favor of what the organization is trying to achieve by connecting further within the distinctive community, and then also being able to see and set up independent engagement strategy per the uniqueness within the AAPI group. And I think that actually is a perfect segue into our next slide here, because as any organization is thinking about engagement with AAPI, there's probably there are two sides to every coin, right? There's, in the past, in the case that without the recognition of diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of time people tend to generalize, like there's a generalization, as I mentioned in the beginning of our webinar today, is Asians are the perpetual foreigners. They don't speak language. They don't speak the language here. So I know you have a lot of personal experience when it comes to dealing with the myth, and I would love to hear from you, because I think it echoes, Caitlin mentioned about her client feeling very embarrassed of packing, the food and bringing the food into the workplace. Tell us more about your experience on that generalization of the myth of Asian, that we don't care about conservation because it's all about consumption when it comes to marine environment, marine ocean conservation.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you so much for teeing it up, and big round of applause to my fellow panelists for basically setting me up for this little moment right here. This is something very near and dear to my heart because food, I think regardless of culture, is a form of sharing culture. It's a way of like, maintaining your identity, as Dr. Caitlin says. It's a way of inviting other folks to like, see the world as you see it and taste it as you see it, right? Which is why, the stereotype of like, Asians eat weird things is extremely harmful. And it's a way to kind of like, other us, or as Michelle said, keep us as perpetual foreigners. And in fact, if we go back to Gold Rush era and we look at the way that Asian Americans, particularly Chinese Americans, were treated during the Gold Rush era, what we ate and the foods we ate was one of the ways that the dominant culture, Western settler society, used to kind of like justify us as subhuman or like not of the similar class because, oh, we can't be the same or equal because we just eat such weird things. And so I think that like, the way that that stereotype has traveled and evolved over time into this modern era is this perception of like, oh, well, Asians care about the ocean and conservation because that's where their seafood comes from. That, conservation for Asians start and end on the dinner plate. And it's such a harmful myth because, it kind of perpetuates two attitudes, which is that it kind of infantilizes Asian Americans who are within the field because it kind of presumes that we care about doing this work in a very narrow scope as it only benefits us, and our like food needs. And also like, it sets up this very harmful, I think, dichotomy that consumption and conservation are inherently against each other. Just like how I think the natural resources space, whether that's the government sector or like nonprofit or community, is starting to realize that conservation isn't just about putting a fence around it and leaving it alone. There needs to be human intervention and there needs to be a human dimension to this sort of work. I see consumption and conservation on this very similar scale. Like if you talk to fishermen, they can tell you intimately about the ocean's health because they're out there every single day. They can see the fish, hold the fish, know the diseases and what's going on. Just like how like, your day-to-day consumers down the line can also feel the impacts downstream of harmful algal blooms or domoic acid poisonings because of shellfish health. All of these things are so interconnected and interrelated that I think when we try to kind of like divest them from each other, we lose this way of seeing and we lose this way of interacting. And so for me personally, like, um, I also like, grew up being very embarrassed of like bringing my lunch to like school, having other kids be like, oh, what is this? What are you eating? But at the same time, now as an adult, when I reflect back on the kind of like the way that my parents raised me, which is like the no rice grain left behind kind of like method, always finish your food, always finish your bowl. They were always rooted in this idea of kind of like, honor where your food came from. Don't take more than what you need. Like, if you are going to take a life, how do we use this to its fullest? Fine dining nowadays calls it like, what's it called? Like snout to tail or nose to tail dining. Well, that's what me and my ancestors have been doing for like since forever. And it's our way of kind of like interacting with nature, acknowledging that like, these resources aren't limitless, but also seeing our own role as stewards in kind of like all of these resources too.
Yeah, wow, that is so powerful. On a couple of things. So what you're saying, it sounds like in the AAPI culture, consumption is conservation because consumption is very much about nodding and paying respect to how the food was provided. So in that cultural relevance, a lot of time the AAPI or the older AAPI community are sort of seeing consumption being a form of conservation, or at least paying respect to that. That's incredibly powerful. One of the other thing that An had just mentioned that I find really, really impactful is she mentioned about you can't conserve something based on, I mean, by putting up a fence around it. No environmental protection is going to happen by excluding the people that you want to impact positive change. So based on that, now Parth, I also understand that you're a senior scientist at an environmental consulting firm. So you guide a lot of your clients around strategies and practices on environmental conservation. What role do you think, whether it's government, nonprofit, or for-profit organization, play in fostering an inclusive environment with the API community?
So one thing about conservation and everything is it becomes very cut and dry, very black and white oftentimes of hey, this is what we have. This is the flora, the fauna, whatever it may be of the region. This is what we have here. This is how we need to do the work. This is how we need to approach it. Kind of blanketed. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different people, a lot of different backgrounds, people who are immigrants, people who are native to the area that may not have the accessibility to the knowledge of everything. So when we talk about marine protected areas and the knowledge of conservation and everything, it's not a simple thing of just like, oh, we need to provide the information in translatable materials. It's like a thing that I faced when I entered into the environmental workforce is that you enter into it with this black and white, cool, this is what's here, this is how we're going to save it. But if you don't have a background in it, you don't have upbringing within it, you don't have as much knowledge, you're kind of in a bit more of an uphill struggle to learn everything, while you're also facing the look down upon from your community, because it's like, oh, what are you doing your work in? You're, oh, science, you'll be a doctor. No, I'm doing ecology. So it's like when it comes to how we express conservation as a whole towards different types of peoples, we also have to understand that they may not have had as much access or background in it. And so going on off of what An said, heritage and where you come from does have a factor, but that doesn't mean it's a wall. It doesn't mean that we can't then learn more or approach more or get more access to getting this knowledge out there, because we live in a world where environmental impact is getting more and more dire, of course. So everybody has to be involved at this point. So it's not just about having translatable materials, it's about having, I don't know, seminars, having access to things that families can come to, different communities can have access to, and start learning, oh, this is a viable direction and an important career, and these are the steps that we can take for taking care of these areas while also respecting where we come from. I myself am a vegan, just like Caitlin mentioned, I believe. And so I have a different viewpoint when it comes to conservation because of that added layer that I myself have. But therein, in and of itself, is me having a different viewpoint from somebody else. So it kind of shows that, oh, there you go. There's a prime example of having different backgrounds and different experiences as to what's necessary versus not when it comes to conservation. A very common thing you'll see is people going and popping off limpets for food off of coastal zones. And that's something that we can't be doing really anymore, especially owl limpets. We're trying to gauge their sizes and make sure that their populations are growing. And so these are things that it used to be a food source that was very common, but now we're looking at it from a consumption versus a conservation point of view. And there's nothing wrong with that transition, but it's understanding why, where, what, who, etc., and building that into our like forward trajectory of, okay, this is why we need to now take care of these from now onwards, in a sense. So I myself, with that vegan background, gives another version of, hey, we're all different in how we view these regions.
Great, thank you so much, Parth. So as we have uncovered the myth around conservation versus consumption, and we also want to explore the opposite side, which is once organizations are able to recognize the distinctive background within each of the AAPI community, on one of the key benefit that we can draw from past practices is around the legacy of traditional knowledge. So An, I know you have done a lot of research in that field, and would you mind sharing with us on a few examples of the tribal knowledge and then also the positive impact to conservation, please?
Yeah, totally. And to give a little bit more background on this, at the Ocean Protection Council, one of the things that I focus on within the tribal affairs space is how do we advance tribal stewardship here in California with our California Native American tribe partners. For this slide, it pulls it back a little bit more globally, which is just all traditional knowledges across the global scale, because there are indigenous communities within and throughout the Asian continent and the Pacific Islands, and their knowledges are both still active and practicing today as well. And so I think that the value of these traditional knowledges is that it really is just this extensive, deep body of information and knowledge that tells us a different perspective of the natural world. And it's a way of moving, interacting with our natural resources that unfortunately for a lot of communities has been disconnected or lost over time, whether that was due to imperialization or colonialization or just the westernization and the loss of these oral histories. And I think honoring that legacy is so, so important because they are valuable bodies of knowledge. A really salient one that's happening right now in California is prescribed burns. They were actually outlawed and banned by the California state government, I believe, for a while because, logically, air quote, logically, setting fire to our natural resources doesn't make sense. But now we have evidence and we're listening to tribal stewards and tribal communities who are saying, no, this cultural fire is a prescribed burn. It helps clear out the underbrush. So then when there is a chance of a wildfire sparking, we've already taken care of the fuel that would have caused these fires to burn even more intensely. And therefore it's a way of stewarding and ensuring the land is, protected, but also safe, and healthy. And I think that this really relates back to the sort of work that we're doing in the conservation coastal space is not just acknowledging those traditional knowledges of all of these indigenous communities, for example, but also maybe looking back at our own history and reflecting on where do we go from here. There's a point here about the Point Alona's Chinese fishing village that was established in California and kind of how it came to be about, but also how it came to disappear, right? What societal economic events happened that pressured this community to disappear. And I really recommend folks if you work within the conservation space, you work with communities of color, you're interested in getting into the tribal affairs space and having tribal partnerships, learning more about these things and acknowledging kind of both California's history and how we've as different communities and different sectors intersected and interacted with these communities will just help you inform your work so much more onwards. And I think the benefit of all of this is really from the empathy lens for me, right? Because you can't expect to build trust or relationships with communities that have been harmed. You can't expect these things to just happen overnight and everybody to be on board. We gotta find that common thread with each other, and we gotta connect and rebuild again as a community. And that starts with educating ourselves. It starts with acknowledging our different histories. And it also starts with being able to see things from different perspectives, as well as acknowledging different bodies of knowledge.
You're sharing so many things that are so important and inspiring to myself and then also everyone that's on this webinar here. Thank you so much. With being the common thread that An had mentioned, here at the AAPI Affinity Group of the MPA Collaborative Network, we're not just building a strategy to build the network to the AAPI community, but also we want to be stewards and guiding the path and building that meaningful connection from organizations to the entire AAPI community. That's why you heard from all of our panelists around the distinction, the diversity within the AAPI group, how to best connect with them, and then also what are some of the common myths and the benefit to recognizing and tapping into the legacy of the AAPI heritage. The focus, like we have mentioned, is truly about, An had mentioned, building that common thread, that meaningful connection, and that has to be done through an integrative approach. Real change happens when people feel like they have a sense of ownership and start to model the behavior. And that can only be done through an integrative approach. That's why here at the Collaborative Network, and then also as part of the mission for the Affinity Group, is that we're concentrating on promoting the awareness of the involvement and then also the opportunity that is within the AAPI community. And we want to be partnered with all of you who are on this call listening right now in providing resource guidance and sharing with you on the path moving ahead, and then also continue to deliver education to help inform the community on the significance of ocean conservation. So I want to take a moment before we wrap up. We have a couple of minutes left in our webinar. And before we wrap up our presentation, I wanted to just invite you to reflect upon the insights that were shared by our panelists today, and then also start preparing any question that you have. But just to start off, I have already collected a few of the questions from our attendees here. And the first question that we have is actually for Helen. Helen, so we would like to know what strategies can be implemented in increasing AAPI representation in environmental science and conservation field.
Yeah, so I think what my answer kind of like resonates with what Parv said about viable career options and career path. So I guess a lot of you share the same experience of like when you're choosing this career, your parents are like just wondering like what exactly conservation is doing. And so myself, for example, like when I choose this career path, my parents wasn't supportive at all because they just didn't know what are the career options out there. And once until recent year, they started to learn more about it, and like they know that I can take care of myself. They're more supportive, but just like in general, also like because I just graduated from my master program, and at UCI there's also tons of like Taiwanese students there, but none of them were like in the same career path as me. So a lot of times I feel like kind of a little bit lonely in my own path, trying to like find my way around in this career path. So I would say it's definitely really helpful to make all those career options in path more transparent and available to young people that are interested in this field. And even for international students, offer more opportunities for international students in this field. Also, by a note that I know a lot of Taiwanese come here to study. They focus on engineering, and they have a lot of resources of like how to get visa and stuff. And in this field, I know it's very limited, especially for immigrants to start their career here.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for An. How can organizations better engage with diverse communities to ensure that their voices are included in the decision-making process?
$1 million question, Michelle, and one that keeps me employed, hopefully. But essentially, I think that it really does start with empathy and educating your day-to-day on the ground managers. So the folks who are actually interacting with community members, helping them understand their community that they're working with, any like significant historical kind of like, interactions that maybe your agency or maybe that your organization previously has had before. Because if you're entering into a community that has had some historical mistrust, or there's differing cultural values, you're already not speaking the same language, so to say. And therefore it's going to be really hard to find that common ground. But I think like the most crucial thing I've really learned is just patience. I understand that like the work that we do is so urgent and it's so timely, but at the same time, these relationships just cannot be built overnight. And so having the patience and understanding to continue to engage, even if it seems like the other party isn't interested, because we don't know. We don't know if it's a capacity thing. We don't know if folks genuinely aren't interested, or they're just overwhelmed, or there's other things going on. But having kind of like, that enduring understanding to just be empathetic, sympathetic, and just keep persisting.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Now, our next question, let me see, is for Dr. Caitlin. What future trends do you see in the integration of cultural diversity and conservation? And most importantly, how would you recommend organizations prepare themselves to meet these changes?
I think that we can, most likely we will see more of the inclusive approach, which we're seeing right now, to have conservations that recognize the traditional knowledge and practice of indigenous and local communities. So for me as a leader, embracing those trends, that means I actively seek the participation from the diverse cultural group, having the conversations and respect their culture and heritage, and acknowledge their rights and their knowledge system. And we, like what Ans shared earlier, is really wanted to make sure that our organizations, we have representations of different group in the leadership role. Just use myself as example. I thought I'm a pretty progressive person, but when I was doing the training with one of our clinicians, and then I was asking about the pronouns, and the person shared with me is that they, them, and she, her, and I was confused. So I have to ask them to educate me when, in what kind of setting that you will prefer me to refer you they, them, and under what circumstances that you would like to use as she, her, because this is really new to me. So to me, it's really important to educate ourselves, ongoing educated and ongoing to pursue this information and cultural competency training will be really, really important as organizations and leaders.
Thank you. That was so important. Absolutely. Now, our last question goes out to Parth. So with your experience, Parth, what do you think we can do to promote more involvement from the AAPI community?
So one thing that I did actually in my master's was something really cool. We worked with the Newport Back Bay Science Center, and we had a mobile touch tank. Imagine a food truck that they gutted out and filled it with a bunch of marine aquaria, brought that to the MPAs and had it kind of adjacent to the coastal zone so families and personnel could come and see what a microcosm of the coastal zone would look like, get to interact with and learn about the meaning and the necessity and everything about it in a safe space where we're not damaging the actual environment. Ideas like that are really cool. It's accessible for everyone. It's free. It's available. It's easy to move it around. I mean, it was a mobile touch tank, really. So that's kind of just an example of ideas like that are what make access to conservation, MPA knowledge, to ecology as a whole, kind of just any of these offbeat careers, right? You know, it kind of makes them more equitable and it gives them people more access to them. And I think ideas like that are what we need to start leaning into and find ways that are okay. How are ways we can actually get out into the field and bring people into it rather than just here's a pamphlet, rather than just here's some text to read, you know, things that are actually a little more hands-on, things that actually allow you to see what it means with everybody having access. So a fun idea, something like that is what we should continue to build upon, I think.
Thank you very much, Parth. Now, before we wrap up our webinar today, I just wanted to open up the forum for all of our panelists to, if there's anything else that you would like to share with this group here. Anyone? Well, we invite everyone, all of the attendees from today's webinar to continue to connect with us at the Collaborative Network Affinity Group. You can reach me on the email that Aubrey just dropped into the chat button here. And if you are interested in connecting with any of the members from the Affinity Group, simply just reach out to the MPA Collaborative Network. We love to hear from you. If you're looking to learn more, please share with us on what we might be able to provide you on whether it's education or just exchange of ideas or collaboration. Once again, thank you very much for all of your time and joining us in today's webinar. Big thank you goes out to our panelists, Helen, Parth, Kate, Dr. Caitlin, and then also An. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.